welcome to one of our Civilitas forums. I want to start by expressing thanks to Ed Balasanyan and the Armenian Center for Contemporary and Experimental Art. Because back in the spring, Ed said, I'm trying to bring Alexandra Avakian. I'm hoping we'll get support from the U.S. Embassy. Do you want to do a public forum? I said, are you kidding? Yes, I would like to do a public forum. It doesn't matter what we're talking about, because Alexandra manages to get herself into situations and countries at times that are critical, apparently, to world history. Do you know that before you go?
Sometimes.
This topic, the look into the soul of the Muslim world, is something that is very important today in the world, and especially to Armenians who for centuries have lived both in and at the edge of the Muslim world, and in fact have done this since the advent of Islam. Today, the Muslim world stretches around the globe: China, Latin America, Detroit, Michigan, and places that we didn't know before. Not that it wasn't there before, but we didn't know before. And today, much of global politics revolves around ways of understanding each other, now that we live not across borders, but next door to each other. And Armenians live certainly in close proximity to the Muslim world. 3 of our 4 neighbors are majority Muslim, and that, of course, is an important part of our relations, although I would say at no time have been the cause of either worsening or better relations, but it's a reality that this is our neighborhood. Today is a special day for Americans specifically, not just the election, but also the election of Barack Obama, the re-election of Barack Obama today in the world. And I think that in many ways, Ambassador Heffern, your being here today says a lot about America and the world generally, both the election this morning and your presence here, your support of this exhibition. I know you'd like to say a few words, and I know you're running, so if you would like to join us now, Sona will give you the microphone. And we want to thank you, both on behalf of NAPAG and on behalf of Civilitas, for supporting this.
Salvi, great. It's great to see you again, old friend and partner and colleague. New friend Edward, new friend Alexandra. It's great to see you and play a small part in this exhibit today. Embassy was very happy to be part of this process and to help bring this important collection to Yerevan. And let me just say just a couple things just to kick it off, a couple of hopefully thoughts which will generate perhaps some discussion. I've got all my paraphernalia, my bipartisan paraphernalia from the campaign this morning. I had another button that said I voted, but that fell off. But I did vote this morning. I voted twice. Don't tell the press. I voted twice. I voted once by mail to the state of Virginia, and then I voted this morning just for fun. It was a really exciting contest for us, and I'm not going to talk politics here, but it was an exciting contest. It was a real contest, 2 strong candidates, very different points of view, very different backgrounds, very diverse backgrounds, and really an open contest of ideas. Now it got negative, and there were some things that weren't great about it, but it was a contest of ideas between 2 political philosophies on the future of the United States of America, and that's what an election is supposed to be about. Just parenthetically, I hope that's what happens in your elections in February, but that's a different topic. President Obama, in his speech after he received the call, very gracious call and very gracious speech from Governor Romney, President Obama came on and had a really good sentence. Well, he had a lot of good sentences, but one sentence on diversity, which is the topic today, and I don't have it exactly, but he said basically something like, that the promise of America, the American dream, is that it doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter where you come from, where you live, doesn't matter how much money you have, doesn't matter who you love. If you work hard, if you try, you should have the opportunity to succeed. And that's to me what the United States is all about, and I hope will continue to be a message, a positive message that we send around the world, and diversity for us is a source of our strength. Our new immigrants are our most entrepreneurial people. Our ethnic diversity is a huge source of cultural openness and excitement, and brings a whole range of good, positive benefits to all of us. So diversity is a source of strength for us, and I think for all countries and all regions. And I hope Armenians see it that way as well. And I know that's one of the themes of this exhibit. Let me say one thing more specifically about Islam, and I've got it's based on my experience in Indonesia. A couple tours ago, my family and I served in Jakarta, Indonesia. And there are more Muslims in Indonesia than all of the Arab world combined. And so I had a lot of Muslim friends there, and we had a lot of conversations, and that's the word I want to use. I want to talk about is conversation, and I hope that's what these photographs will generate here, is a real conversation, both within Armenia and where opportunities arise between Armenians and their neighbors. And in Jakarta, we had a lot of real conversations with real Muslims about real sensitive issues. You know, when a Muslim is married to a Christian, what happens to the kids? And the whole idea of conversion is very controversial in the Muslim world. And a good friend of ours was a Western-educated young woman, wore the hijab, wore the veil, not the burqa, but the veil over her head. And we saw pictures of her when she was in college. She didn't have the veil. And I said to her, "Why do you wear the veil all of a sudden?" And we'd ask whatever question occurred to us to understand the way they think. And she said, "Well, I was in college. I was 18, 19, 20. Modesty wasn't my first priority. As I've gotten older and married, in Islam, modesty is really important. And so it's not a political statement. It's not a religious statement. It's Islamic modesty." And she was very matter of fact about it. The only point of this is that having a real conversation with people who are different from you, if done respectfully and done with open-mindedness, I think is really important. And another example that I would give is the embassy, we sponsor some cross-border projects between Armenia and Turkey and Armenia and Azerbaijan. And I often meet with the young people. Sometimes it's young people, sometimes business, sometimes journalists, all different categories. But with young people especially, I make a couple of points with them. I say, "Tell me what is good about this experience that you've had with this Turkish group or sometimes Azerbaijani group." And they talk about Facebook friends, and they talk about what their favorite music is and their favorite dances, and they're like brothers and sisters now, and a lot of really heartwarming kinds of stories that they tell about their relationship from this cross-border experience. But then I say to them, but did you have a real conversation? Did you have a real conversation with this Turkish person or this Azerbaijani person? Did you say to them whatever you wanted to say about history? Or did you say to them, what do you want to say about your government? Why does your government say what it says about us? Why does your government do what it does do what it does? And they should say the same to you. I think it's good to be Facebook friends. I love Facebook friends. I do Twitter. I got a lot of tweets out there, and I would like you to all join me on Twitter. But that's not enough. I think you need to have a real conversation when you're in a difficult neighborhood like this, and when you have people around you who you've had historical differences with, and not so historical differences, more recent differences. So that's just my unsolicited advice, request, that as you have opportunities to participate in cross-border activities, to ask real questions respectfully and open-mindedly, and I think something good over the long term will come out of that. So I've spoken too long. I just wanted to express support for this exhibit, for our partnership with Civilitas, a great organization, and to thank Alexandra for launching this project, and with creativity and imagination and resourcefulness. I don't know how you got into all these places, but you did it, and we're going to benefit from this for a long, long time. So thank you, Edward, South B, Alexandra, for inviting me to say a word, and thank you all for your interest in this exhibit today. Thank you very much.
Alexandra Avakian is a photojournalist who has found herself in all sorts of places, as the ambassador said. Berlin when the Berlin Wall was falling, and the USSR when the USSR was collapsing, and Armenia was when it was earthquaking and warring and independencing. And she says her work has allowed her to combine her passion for photography and storytelling with her ancestors' shared history with people in conflict and her fascination with revolution. If that's not a fascinating lifetime. Alex, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
I looked at the photos. I looked at the photos here. I looked at the book, Windows of the Soul. And something really weird struck me, that so many of them are of isolation, of desolation, of destitution, of all of the worst situations of humanity. And then, when they're photos of life and activity, they're usually in places where you don't expect to find Muslims. That's not what the Muslim world is supposed to be. Was any of this a surprise to you, or did you know where you were going?
I knew where I was going, definitely. I'm very self-directed, and I go where I want to go.
And you've been to Palestine, Africa, Iran. This is the CIS?
This is the United States, actually. It was a 2-year project on Muslims in America for National Geographic.
And you have the stans, Tajikistan and...
Yes, some stans are here.
The one you don't have is China, probably, where there's a...
Right.
It is amazing to me to find this kind of willingness to allow the most basic of human situations to be captured, to be photographed. Is that a problem? Are you challenging them when you're in that situation? Are you taking something from them, or are you helping them?
I think it really depends. I think that, it's entirely different if you're telling a daily life story in Iran from when you're photographing Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hezbollah in Lebanon was one of the most difficult things I ever did in my life.
You want to tell us why?
Well, the access was nearly impossible. They don't let press in, even Lebanese press, for the most part. And so, it took a lot of patience and actually waiting in my hotel room for phone calls that never came. I was refused on many, many points and had to find ways around it. But ultimately, the deputy in charge of Hezbollah, Sheikh Naim Qassem, started, inviting me places, much to my surprise.
You're an Armenian woman.
Yes.
Is that easier or harder in these situations?
Definitely easier.
Easier?
Yeah. Being an Armenian woman has helped me a great deal. Being an Armenian American woman, I have to say, because to be an American man and covering these regions is a lot more difficult for various reasons.
What reasons?
Well, maybe they don't blame women as much in their own minds when they blame the West for things. They might blame women a little less. Maybe that's why. But also I look like their sisters, and, there's a certain comfort that I have with the cultures.
And that comes from?
That comes from practice and observation. It also comes from growing up with very Armenian grandparents who, were conservative. So, yeah, that helps too.
What did you find that surprised you?
So many things. I think one of the things is in conflict. The people who you think are going to be strong are sometimes very weak, and the people who are seemingly weak can be incredibly strong. And that's very revealing.
Was there a commonality other than the Muslim faith? I mean, what you found in Africa, what you find with Hezbollah, what you found in Iran, anything other than the Muslim faith? Are we doing it an injustice to say the Muslim world? Because after all, there's the Christian world, and boy, are we different from each other.
Right. That's a fantastic question. And actually, I would take it even further to say that the things that we have in common with those in the so-called Muslim world are many more than the things we have between us, the obstacles. Because everybody, the commonality every good human being wants to take care of their families, wants to, build their lives and their country. So the commonalities are more than the differences, actually, if we could only look beyond.
Why is it that so many of the pictures are... I'm not sure I love looking at these pictures. I'm not sure I want them on my wall.
Right.
Why is it that so many of them are of pain and... pain?
Right. Well, for 10 years I was a conflict photographer for the most part. I would say about, 80 or 90% of what I did between 1986 and 1996 was conflict. And, I was because of my family history, I think, because look, I grew up in show business, okay? I grew up in a movie business family. I didn't need to do this. This came because really around the age of 19 or 20, I discovered what my own family had gone through. I mean, as we were talking about, the grandparents in America often don't tell their grandchildren what they went through to get to the United States. And all immigrants in the United States have run from something, whether it's economic stress, distress,
sure.
or genocide,
sure.
Human rights reasons, all kinds of reasons that people come to the United States. My family too.
But once they get there, they want their grandchildren to be American and to forget the sorrow, to forget the sadness. So when I discovered at the age of 19 or 20 that my grandmother's family, she was from Tbilisi. My grandmother's family was, and this is very common to many of you here, I'm sure, and in the former Soviet Union, they were wiped out under Stalin completely. And on my grandfather's side, he was from northwest Iran. They fled the genocide as it spilled over the Turkish-Iranian border. So, these things I discovered, and I said, wow, my grandparents, carried this pain silently. And they were gone by the time I realized all this. They had passed. So I really became obsessed with knowing personally what it was like to have to, flee with your child, to have to survive. And I threw myself into these regions where I could document that kind of struggle. I saw it as a mission. And mostly in those years I was covering conflict, I worked for Time magazine, which was the perfect place to be working for that, on that subject. They just kept me going for a long time on that. The mother with the dead son, the man there, by a corpse, is any of this, do they at critical points in life or death, at these points, do the subjects of these photos see these as issues of Muslim and Christian?
Not at all.
Perhaps the leaders, you alluded to that earlier, but do they?
No. I think that, conflict and the results of conflict are unfortunately universal. And that, it's happened all over the world. It has nothing to do with Islam. At the moment, there are some problems in the Middle East. But it used to be the Soviet Union and the United States. There was Vietnam, and there was Pol Pot in Cambodia, genocide within, one country. Rwanda. I mean, it happens, Christians against Christians, and Muslim and Christian against each other, Jew and Muslim against each other. It has nothing to do with Islam per se. It's humanity.
Especially these days when between the movies and, lots of people jumping to conclusions, we so often ascribe so much of what's problematic in the world to either, Muslim governments or individuals, that it's very striking to see so many pictures of loss and bereavement in the Muslim world, not by Muslims, but of Muslims. And this is difficult to accept, perhaps. Am I the only one saying this?
Well, if you look at it, actually, half of it is not of conflict.
Yes, half of it is beautiful.
You know, and that's also true of the book. But the conflict definitely grabs people, and you know, tends to draw focus from some of the more subtle aspects of the book. And it is, by the way, this exhibition is based on my National Geographic book, Windows of the Soul, My Journeys in the Muslim World. And it's 17 years of work. But I have to say that, you know, I'm not done. You know, I'm still working on it. It's kind of a lifetime interest.
You don't have Armenians in Muslim countries represented here, but you do have a picture in Qarabağ.
Yes.
Because?
Actually, you know, it's kind of part of the personal part of my story. I mean, when I covered the war from the very beginning in 1988, when the first skirmishes broke out, then I was based in Moscow, and I, you know, covered the war then. And probably took more risks than ever when I covered that story. It was imperative for me to do it. And it's on the edge of the Muslim world, right? So a lot of these things happen on the edge. There's Sudan, that happens on the edge of Christianity and Islam, you know, in the case of these photos. Sometimes it's on the edge.
Even though it happens on the edge, are we necessarily implying it happens because of?
No, definitely not. Definitely not. I think that people can use all kinds of religion and ideology against each other, and there is this process of dehumanizing the other, which always happens in war. Before war, it begins, you know, it starts to build and build. And people will use anything in order to sort of demonize the other.
So in this case, Muslim is a description and not an accusation.
Oh, it's not an accusation at all. And it's not a definition of Muslim or Islam or anything. This is just, actually, it's a memoir. It's a photographic and you know, written memoir of my own experience. So definitely I'm not bringing judgments. And when I call it Windows of the Soul, it's not only my looking out, it's they're coming through my lens. And in that sense, they're reaching the American public. All of these people are reaching the public through my lens. And that's more than half of the importance for me.
Do you go back and try to find some of your heroes?
Yeah, sometimes. And I was actually looking for the girl with the dove.
That you're on cover story?
No, it's Gaza, actually.
It's Gaza?
Yeah.
The one that was the poster for this exhibition?
Yes.
That's Gaza?
Yes. Yeah, she was 15 then when I took that picture. And my friends have been looking for her in Gaza, and I went looking for her in Gaza, and no, we haven't found her yet. And Gaza's a small place.
You've been to Iran more than once?
Yes.
Have you seen the evolution that is brought to today's social political situation there?
Well, I haven't been to today's Iran. I mean, last time I was there, President Khatami was in power, and it was quite different than it is today.
I would like, there are a lot of photographers in the audience and students of photography.
Not necessarily discussion, but thanks to Ambassador of the United States for arranging support of this project. It's very important for us. It's important because we live in this global village and we have to touch each other. We have to get close to each other. We have to see each other, talk to each other. And this kind of events facilitate exactly that. So, Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for your support. And Alexandra, it's a joy to have you here in Armenia. And I promise we'll continue the work as we started. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Balasanian. Thank you, Napag. Palestine has to be one of the most difficult places to cover because although Many Palestinians are Muslims. There are also many Christian Palestinians. And, of course, Israel is mostly a Jewish state, but not only. And so it's one of the most obvious places where the issue isn't religion. It's other things.
Right.
Is it easier or harder? Because it's such a complex place. Because there's so many ethnicities, so many class issues, so many issues. The global interest and engagement. How does covering Palestine differ from covering the rest of the Muslim world?
I think it's much more complex because of the very strong opinions coming from different sides, even within each society. If you're talking about Palestinian or Israeli society, there are many, many divisions and differences in opinion. And I have found that just listening to people is key and really helps me. I mean, every time I go, I can't count how many times I've been there. I lived there.
You lived there for quite a few years.
Yeah, well, I lived there in Gaza for 2 years. But I also had a place in Jerusalem, so I was back and forth. But every time I go, even now, I learn more.
Again, American woman
Right.
in that environment.
Right.
Welcome?
Well, I moved there at a point when nobody cared. It was before it had come out that the Palestinians and Israelis had been working on a peace deal. So I went, very often I like to go to forgotten places that were important in the news, but still have issues, but people that have forgotten about it, or it's just fallen off, the news cycle. I think that's when I can be useful. So that's when I moved there. And I actually, I lost a lot of money because it was a personal project and I was just, it was out of pocket. And then when the Palestinians and Israelis made peace, all the work came to me. I got the National Geographic Society grant and the magazine and everything just came back. But I was there, at first sharing expenses with another photographer, Armenian guy, and just making photographs. And people got to know me.
And therefore trust you.
Yeah, I was their neighbor.
And therefore access.
A lot of access. But also, I had to work on the Israeli settlements as well. So the way I approached it was, okay, you can be in really big trouble if you just show up on an Israeli settlement and you're seen by your Palestinian neighbor because he's laying bricks on the settlement for settlement houses. You're going to be in deep trouble. So what I did was I was very honest on both sides. I told the Israelis, look, I'm living here, on the Palestinian side. Told the Palestinians, look, I'm going to be on the settlement today. So I say this a lot to students, actually. Openness is incredibly important.
Gee, we say that in civil society, too.
Very, very, very key.
Ambassador, did you want to say something?
Yeah.
My question is about words, not the pictures as much, so I'm sorry if it's a digression. How do you deal with words that to us can be scary, but have so many different meanings in the Islam world? Jihad and Sharia are the two that come to mind. Can you those words are scary to us in many contexts.
Right.
But they mean so many different things to so many different people in all the various diverse groups that you met with. How do you deal with words when you describe your pictures, color words that have loaded words that sometimes take on meaning that maybe might be unintended?
Well, I use those words when very deliberately in situations where they apply. Like if it's Islamic jihad, if I see in the book, for example, a story of witnessing them in a firefight with the Israelis and then escaping and how they escaped, I will describe them as Islamic jihad. Or, if it's somebody's name. Jihad is actually a very common first name in the Arab world.
And it means something very different from what it's come to.
Internal conflict.
No,
Right,
it means
it
something else. Where's anybody Arabic? Jihad.
Being a good Muslim in the most sort of classical kind of observant terms of observing Ramadan and, staying away from alcohol maybe, that's another meaning of jihad. that's very, very common and has been sort of left aside, for whatever reason.
The rituals that we associate with Islam, like Sharia law, I don't know if you can catch that in pictures, you know that better than I do, but the rituals aren't really here. You've captured pictures that could be anywhere and anybody.
Right.
Happens to be in the Muslim world.
Right.
Not the rituals, not the specifics.
There are rituals, but not so much maybe in this show. I mean, I think that sometimes you can do more powerful work if you avoid the obvious, like prayer or bloodshed, you can tell the story, for example, of conflict without bloodshed. There's very little bloodshed in this book if you really look at it. There are like 2 pictures. And in prayer, I think there are more than 2, but there are different ways to tell the story that bring more unexpected views. We've seen a lot of prayer pictures, and a lot of bloodshed pictures.
Were you engaged in the sense, did they expect you to take a position? Did they ask you what you think about this or that event?
Yeah.
And?
You try to be diplomatic, You just try to be diplomatic because it's really inappropriate to say, yeah, go get them, or, whatever, to take sides. It's very inappropriate.
You've also been with...
Unethical, actually. Yeah.
You've also been with the leadership. You went to Oslo.
Yes. On Arafat's plane.
On Arafat's plane, when Rabin and Arafat were negotiating and the peace deals. I mean, you've seen the elite, not just the...
Right.
And their willingness to... Look, as an Armenian, I always love photographers and journalists because I want our story out.
Right.
I don't hide from you, the professional photojournalist. Right. What was their approach?
Well, I would say it's very much the same. Because this is what I've found, is that anywhere with anybody, whether it's a farmer or it's a leader, they let you in because of their interest. And so, it was Yasser Arafat in particular took a liking to me. He used to say, I am Armenian. He had this little voice. I am Armenian. My name is Yasser Avakian. And he used to call me a dictator and a troublemaker.
I can imagine.
He said, you are a dictator. And this was when I'd asked for too many pictures for something, But it was in his interest.
The Armenian world in these places, did you mix? Did you interact?
Sometimes.
Especially Lebanon, Palestine, Iran.
In the Palestinian territories, definitely. I mean, I have very, very close friends in Jerusalem, in the Armenian quarter. In Lebanon, what I did, I made a decision on that trip, on those trips, rather. It was 3 trips on Hezbollah. I made a very, very clear decision not to mix with anybody else. I wanted to give Hezbollah a clear sign that I was very serious. So most journalists go to Lebanon, they play a lot. It's a party life, and there's a party side to Lebanon, really fun. And so, but what I did instead was I stayed in a hotel that nobody had heard of and didn't know how to get there, on the edge of Hezbollah territory. And I basically, because I knew they'd be watching me all the time, I basically didn't do anything else. So it was a clear message that I meant business in terms of getting my access, and that I wasn't there to party.
And
so I didn't see the Armenians. That's the answer.
Except, Hezbollah has had its Armenian contacts and relations. Yes. And they would talk about this?
Yeah, well, they did. They said they realized I was Armenian, and they said, "Oh, we like your people." This is what they would say: "We like your people."
And that maybe we trained some of your people?
No, they didn't say that.
No?
Some of the people in the PLO said that in the late 80s. They said that they had been involved in training Armenians in Lebanon. That's what they told me.
The differences between the Arab world and the Iranian world?
Well, huge. Yeah.
I don't think, I mean, I know the West doesn't see it often, and I don't even know if we see it that way.
Right.
See the differences.
Yeah.
Tell us.
Well, I mean, first of all, Iran is multicultural in terms of tribes. There are just so many tribes, and each one has its own tradition. There are tribes in the Arab world as well, but it's more homogeneous, I would say, culturally than it is, and even ethnically, than it is in Iran. Iran is very multi-ethnic, and that carries with it, various styles and, roots.
And their self-perception, their image of themselves in the world, how does that differ, the Arab world and the Iranian world?
Well, I think both are very proud in their own way. And in the Arab world, you can't really generalize because there are just so many different cultures actually in the Arab world, different ways of approaching everything from, how their souk is run to, how politics is done to, how you get something done in your child's school. It's just, each culture is very different. The Palestinians are not like the Iraqis, and the Iraqis are not like the Saudis.
I'd like to ask you, if you ever decide to go to Syria, which angle do you think you would take your photos from? And would you really be able to distance yourself from what is happening there?
Well, I have been to Syria for all kinds of reasons. In journalistic reasons, photographing different kinds of stories, from culture to politics to the Armenian genocide. So, the Harar and Anna Hovnanian Foundation actually gave me a grant to go and photograph mass graves of the Armenian genocide, which I did as well. And so, I think there's one photo in the book from there. So I am very aware of the Armenian situation. I have friends there, and I would go back, actually. I think people who are doing the Christian story in Syria and not writing about Armenians are really missing the story. They're missing the story. Because Syrian Armenians, the history of Armenians in Syria is so important to Syria. Syria has embraced the genocide survivors generation after generation, not without problems, not without issues, of course, but they are part of Syrian society. And so they're really tied up with each other. And the situation right now is very scary for Armenians. It's really frightening. So, I don't know if that answers your question. But definitely I would go and look into that again.
Egypt?
Yes.
Have you been to Egypt?
Yes.
And the reason I ask is kind of a follow-up to Elise's, because if Syria used to be the vibrant community, I don't know what it's going to be in a year or 5 years. And Egypt already is not, that elite community of Armenians that it was, the Yakubian building. There's a reason. And it may not be India. It may not be, how do I say this politely? A museum. It may not be a museum of an old Armenian presence.
Right.
But Egypt is. Is that apparent? I mean, that community that used to be something and is now 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 strong.
In Egypt?
In Egypt. A different lifestyle, a different self-image than what you got in Syria and Lebanon?
Well, actually, I didn't spend time with the Armenian community in Egypt. So I really can't speak much about it, like I did in Syria or Lebanon. So.
First of all, my admiration for what you have done, the challenges that you have met, and the technique that you have used in photography, because I can see my son is a photographer. That's why I can relate to that and see the talented eye that you have catching the moment, because most probably for each one of the pictures you have taken 50 of them just to catch the moment. And they are very significant and they are very telling. Watching all those pictures, of course, I didn't have the time to do that. I'll do it later. I mean, after this program. I can feel that there was a purpose underlying to introduce the good side, the positive side of the Muslim world to those of us who are who don't know the Muslim world and always meet that topic with apprehension, with kind of a prejudice, especially in the American society. Was there a purpose, that kind of a purpose, or it was just the conflicts that attracted you to this?
Thanks for asking that question. That's a great question. This is something that I didn't really formulate or even understand myself until a little bit later. And then fully, it really took years to understand exactly what I was doing, is really trying to create bridges. By the time I had left conflict photography behind in 1996, I said no more. I was doing culture in the Middle East. So that, both sides were an attempt to bring understanding to that part of the world, to other, people who might not know it themselves, as you said. And I think being Armenian really kind of helps you to understand suffering, basically. And to, at least in my case, to want to bring that understanding to other people.
Have you encountered situations when, in most difficult situations, people would turn and criticize you and say, well, you know what, my sorrow is not your camera's fodder. And this term, camera fodder, is something that is it has a negative connotation. Have you encountered situations like that, and how do you deal with that? Is people's story just a story that you document,
I can tell you.
You do something about it?
Yeah. I think that there was, what popped out at me when you said that was actually in Moscow. I was living in Moscow, and it was communist time. And the people online for food, they would get angry. And as you're trying to tell the story of what's happening, and that's something that's clearly happening. Sometimes your job is not to make yourself happy or to make them happy. Your job is to tell the story. So, and there are times, for example, when I was covering conflict, actually the reason why I stopped, too many funerals. I was very uncomfortable to photograph funerals. You can imagine. You feel horrible. And there's a price. There's a price to this job. So it's not as if it doesn't take a piece of you. It definitely takes a piece of you. And so I don't know if that gets anywhere close to what you were asking. But there have been times, I would say most of the time people understand. They completely understand what you're doing. But, there have been a few times when people, were upset, like in Moscow, those times. Yeah.
You mentioned you were photographing the Karabakh movement from its beginning. Can you talk a little bit more about it?
The war.
The war.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. And then I have another question.
Ask them both.
Both? Okay. When do you know you've had the right shot? Like, this lady was saying you could take 50 shots of the same thing and then one just has a special feeling. What to you is that special feeling?
Well, that's What a lovely question. An artistic question. Well, it's a kind of acknowledgement in your soul. You just go, oh, yes. You know, it's a combination of composition, light, content, and you just, many times you know it, and you say that's the shot. But then other times you can be surprised by things and even miss them. Like you can take a picture of the dolls downstairs. You know, to me that was a reject, but an editor picked that out, and she was right. You know, she was right. I realized you always need someone else to edit your work with you, you know, or after you do, or before you do. You know, you need someone else, at least one other person, to give a second opinion. About Karabakh, well, yeah, it was horrible. What can I tell you? I mean, you know, it was horrible. People were living underground for, you know, a couple of years. Grad missiles were coming down and, you know, tearing buildings apart and people apart. And
Where did you stay?
well, I stayed in different places, various places. I stayed in the fort at Ascaron. I stayed in the Prime Minister's family bunker at one point.
There are family bunkers.
There was a family bunker.
Today we only know of family palaces. We don't know of family bunkers
It was
anymore.
a family bunker. It was very raw. I stayed in the hotel, which was full of refugees, and it was all refugees, and the top floors were, you know, missiles had gone through some of the walls. So they were banned in the top floors, and then it was just all misery, like down below that. So
you write in the book about going from I don't remember where to where, and the farmer, you know, with the missiles flying.
Yeah.
And just
yeah,
tell us. You know, I don't think we remember the war years.
Right.
I think that the generation that fought it, like our grandfathers, doesn't talk about it.
right,
And then the rest of us, either because of distance or age,
yeah.
don't really remember it for what it was. So tell us stories.
Whew. There's so many stories.
What was the farmer doing? What did he think he was doing?
Oh, well, it was right. It was on the front line. I mean, the front line was here in Ascaron Battalion. So the trench was here. The Azeris were there. And just behind the front line, it dipped down, and there were fields. And these farmers continued and I mean, it was crazy. And this commander that I was with, who then became a general later, he had no gasoline for his Jeep. And he was the commander in Ascaron. He had kerosene. So we were in the middle of that field with that farmer, and the Jeep, it wasn't actually a Jeep, it was a Niva, broke down. And the bullets are flying. You know, the bullets are flying. You hear them, and they're there. And you just hope you're going to get out of there. But the farmer just kept on working. And it was a matter of survival for those people. So,
have you ever been between the choice to make a photo, to shoot, or to help?
yes.
And what you have done? And the second part of this question, what is important for you? To shoot, or much more to help, if you can help?
Right. Well, that's a great question, too, because, you know, a lot of photojournalists think that, or they say that you shouldn't help. In journalism, that you shouldn't help, because if you help, you're changing the story, right? I happen to believe that if you can help, that you should do it. It's just a matter of what I believe in and how I've lived. So yes, I mean, there have been times when I have done that. And so I believe in it. That means you're not helping a side. I want to be very clear about that. You're helping a starving family in the bush who's afraid to come into the refugee camp in Somalia because they're from the different clan and they're starving. You see a father, and they're in the book, this family. You know, you take them and you bring them out of the bush because they're starving. You're not helping an army or a rebel or anybody like that. Those people, you don't help them. But if you, like for example in Abkhazia, there were refugees trying to get out. And I was with the Georgian soldiers, and the Georgian soldiers would not let them out. These were simple people of all kinds. But there was one family I could help because they were not CIS, passport holders. They were Syrians. They were from Syria. And so I actually got them out. I pulled them out of the group because I could. And you know what he said? He said, "God bless America." Tell me.
So, if you're standing and someone shoots a guy just behind you and you could see it. So, what is the first place for you? To make a shoot of the blood on his body, or him with his blood, or to help him? Just, not to survive a family, but just you have seen that someone shot some guy.
I think that, even if it's your friend, and say it's your friend and he's a photographer and he's next to you and he gets shot, you do both.
Ուրեմն ինչպես եք դուք մոտենում, ասենք կադրի կառուցմանը, հա, ինչպես պիտի կոմպոզիցիոն հարցը, ինչպեսի պիտի լինի, ասենք թե դեմի պլանի վրա, երկրին պլանի վրա, միջին պլանի վրա, ասենք ինչպես եք դուք պատմում պատմությունը, ասենք.
How do you frame your picture? How do you deal with foreground, midground, background? How do you tell the story?
Well, I love different levels of things, everything happening at the same time. I love when things are coming from the different corners, and that's what really excites me. But I can't only do that. I have to mix it with other graphic, styles in order not to bore the viewer, because part of my job is communication. And it's when a photo essay is like a piece of music. It has to have different highs and lows and bring you in emotionally, push you back. And so when I'm selecting pictures, I think about that a lot, So it's not only the individual image you're composing and the different kinds of shots you're making, it's what they look like all together.
So, Alexandra, I just came back from my trip from Iran, and except of seeing many common things from Islam world, I discovered many interesting faces of Islamic reality, and one of them was that it was a kind of discovery to see that actually even in such closed country there is a kind of underground world. Mm-hmm. And even on some of your photos I saw, for example, here 3 people in a public place or a beach in Kish island. So do you think that it's possible to find such very interesting, kind of intriguing moments of Islamic underground world and also present them into the world?
Definitely, yeah. And it's a different job. I mean, it's not, maybe, it depends on when you go. How much of this is happening? How much of it will put the person in danger that you're photographing? If you're going to put people in danger, it's not really cool, So you just have to kind of decide when you're in a place, whether it's really possible or not. That's where I would draw the line, is if it puts someone in danger. If it puts someone in danger, I'm not interested. But so it depends when you're there. And you know how things are in Iran? Things change all the time, actually. They go back and forth, this cat and mouse game between the conservatives and the liberals. And so, yeah. But I could definitely see working that stuff in.
Throughout the years, you have, of course, spoken with many fellow journalists from the West, NGO people, diplomats. To what extent do you feel that they understand, the people that you talk to? They took an interest, understood the Islamic world that they were living in, working in. And maybe a big question to that, has that changed over the years?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
That's a great question.
It is.
Never mind the extent to which they were able to relay their knowledge to the West, because that's another one, but just this.
Right. Well, I think that can be an issue, even here. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have heard foreigners in this country, they didn't realize I was Armenian, saying very negative things about Armenia, and it's shocking. And so I have heard that also, in the Islamic world as well, or in Africa. I mean, you hear these things. It's unfortunate that,
But I think deeper, let me continue the question.
Yeah.
There's also the issue of motivation, as with Armenia. There are journalists and photojournalists who come in because it's ethnic and exotic and I don't know what.
Right.
And I guess it is, and so they take their pictures and write their stories and go, but they've never understood me.
Right.
And I don't think they've added an iota to the world understanding me.
Right.
So is there more of that now regarding the Muslim world, because everybody's front pages have the Muslim world, or is there less of that because everybody's front pages have the Muslim world?
Well, I think one of the things that happened in Iraq, which was really, really important for Arabs, Arab journalists, is that, and NGOs and everybody, is that it became too dangerous in Iraq during the war for Americans and Westerners to go and stay for a long time. So the telling of the story of Iraq, as well as a lot of these other countries, started going to Arabs, which was really fantastic. And, like you as Armenian journalists, you who are journalists here, photojournalists, journalists, whatever, videographers, you have now, because the other part of it is budgets have been cut, NGOs and in journalism. So locals are being used a lot more, which is a really, really positive thing, because you can tell your own stories. Instead of parachute journalists coming in and kind of just, taking the whatever little bit of information that they get.
The tip of the iceberg.
The tip of the iceberg.
Absolutely.
You can tell your own stories in a really full, deep way that foreigners can't. So
sometimes good things happen for bad reasons.
Some things could, yeah.
One more, and we need to pick up so that we can set up for the opening. Any more questions? I have a question.
Okay.
Why did you stop?
Conflict?
I mean, lots of cemeteries, funerals, fine, but more. Why did you stop?
It was hard. I mean, it takes a piece of you, and I have to say that to be good at it, and to be good at anything, really, you have to give up your personal life. I had given up my personal life completely. I would go to a wedding and enjoy the wedding. I would photograph the wedding, enjoy it through my lens, but it wasn't my life, that I was getting joy from, and I really missed that. I needed more joy. And I also wanted to approach the world with culture, through culture, rather than telling stories of conflict. I had done that, and I was lucky to be alive. I also had an accident. I broke my knees in Romania on assignment for National Geographic, which meant I couldn't run anymore, which was like the perfect excuse to stop answering the phone. I literally stopped answering the phone because I knew it would be this editor asking me to go somewhere to photograph some revolution or civil war, and I just couldn't. I was over it, and yeah.
If you could go back to one of these places tomorrow morning, where?
Iran.
I knew that.
Yeah.
No more questions? Thank you very much. Thank you, Alexandra Avakian. Thank you, Ed Balakanian.